halls of West Virginia resound with the sound of Golden Blue football.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Now let's bring on the Mountaineers. Goes around about the 50, the 10, the 5. A touchdown, West Virginia. He did it.
He did it. Patrick White. Touchdown, Tay Von Austin.
But Don Nehlen's Mountaineers enjoy walking in where angels feared to tread.
I think you think that these guys are going to fall over dead for you. Well, I got news for you. They're going to punch you right in the mouth. It's Mountaineer pride!
Nothing cheap, nothing dirty, but West Virginia football. West Virginia football.
Leave no doubt tonight. They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night.
They've done it. They've done it. A perfect season.
And the Mountaineers, for the first time in history, undefeated and untied.
Don Nehlen and his Mountaineers, for the second time, have finished a regular season with an unblemished mark.
Ain't no stopping the Golden Blue.
And now recorded from the CRW studios in Almost Heaven, West Virginia, it's the Country Roads webcast with your host, Jordan Cruz.
What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome into episode 207 of the CRW podcast here. Solo by myself on this one, Brad and Steven out on assignment, but hey, it's all good because guess what? It's going to be a positive episode. We've got another West Virginia victory to review here as West Virginia takes down Cincinnati 31-24. Not only is it a victory, but it's the second consecutive victory for WVU. It's the second consecutive road victory for WVU. And probably most importantly at this point in the season, it's the second consecutive conference road victory for WVU. And we'll talk more about that Big 12 conference here at the tail end of the episode because WVU still in the mix as we do a standings update here towards the end once we recap the scores from the games in week 11 of the college football season there. Within the Big 12 conference, a lot of crazy stuff going on, but for WVU, maybe finding themselves a little bit at the right point of the season here as they defeat Cincinnati 31-24 to move to 5-4 overall, back on the winning side of things overall. And most importantly, like I said, conference record now 4-2, and we'll talk more about how things are shaking out within the conference. But of course, want to share some of my thoughts on the game, and then I want to share some interesting things of note before we get to that Big 12 talk. And of course, sandwiched in there between, we will talk the stats from the game, and I'll name some players of the game here after I just kind of give some of my brief thoughts from this one. Honestly, what you got to lead it off with when discussing this game is the West Virginia defense. We knew that would be the storyline heading into it just because of the fact that obviously you fire Jordan Leslie during the bye week, you promote Jeff Kuntz. We wanted to see what that looks like, what changes are different, and how much of a difference does it make in the game. Well, in the first game, it made a huge difference. Honestly, I mean, you can't really deny that with the results for West Virginia. You forced 3 turnovers, 2 of them you returned for touchdowns. You haven't done that all season. You haven't done that in 2 seasons. Matter of fact, spoiler alert is one of the interesting things of note when we get to that portion here in a bit. But nonetheless, I think that West Virginia really, showed up and showed out on the defensive side there for Jeff Kuntz. And you kind of always wonder how a team's going to respond when you have a coaching change like that mid-season, especially here at West Virginia where we've never really seen it, kind of unprecedented. We've talked about it at the head coaching level where it doesn't happen, but even as far as main assistants, coordinators, it hadn't really happened a lot either at WVU. And with that happening, we wanted to see how the team would respond. Would they be downtrodden, because of the changes? Maybe they didn't want them, or would they be rallying behind, Jeff Kuntz and really come out with a good performance? And it definitely seems like the latter there is what occurred for WVU. When you talk about this defensive performance in this game, because they really carried West Virginia to this win in a lot of ways, 14 points off of turnovers, and West Virginia wins by 7 in the end, despite building a big lead early. Unfortunately, that's been a theme throughout the season, is building a big lead and then, having comebacks happen and then trying to survive there at the end. But even though that has been the case, at least West Virginia's been able to survive at the end in these first 2 games. And if they can do that throughout these final 3 games now that we have remaining, they're going to put themselves in a very good position here at season's end after how crazy the conference has been for WVU for sure. But I think coming out of this game, the main storyline obviously is the defense their big-time performance. Jeff Kuntz, his first game calling defensive coordinator, and the last thing I want to note about that before I talk about what I feel like is probably the other main storyline is that just even watching the game, noticeably different for me was it felt like a lot more aggressive, attacking style. I think in the post game that I believe it was Tyron Bradley that mentioned, Jeff Kuntz told him, if you guys get, stops on first and second down and can put them into third and longs, I'm going to let you guys free and go out there and have some fun and have an attacking defense, which I like. That's kind of similar to, Tony Gibson used to do that on third and longs a lot when we were having success when he was running the 3-3-5 at WVU. I know a lot of people was a fan of him. So I like the style of Jeff Kuntz playing a little bit more aggressive, and I noticed that during the game. The first 3rd and 10 that Cincinnati had on what ended up being, their go-ahead drive when they went up 7-0, but to start that drive, West Virginia forced them into a 3rd and 10, and the Mountaineers brought 6 or 7 guys. I believe it was 7 on an all-out blitz, cover 0 in the back end, just man-to-man across the board there with the people left in coverage, and I really liked that. Unfortunately, Sorsby got outside of that and ran for 9 yards, and then they were able to convert on 4th and 1 to continue that drive they ultimately ended up scored on. But the good sign of that was more of what we would see throughout the game. You'd see it later on 4th and 1, they send KK Tarnew on a blitz from the spear position, which is, frankly, something we haven't done a ton, and they thought that they were going to do a lot. That's one of the reasons they moved Aubrey Burks to that spot, was to blitz there. They talked about it in the offseason, but we hadn't seen it a ton. But with KK Tarnew in now, his second time getting action there, Aubrey Burks still out. Hopefully he's going to be able to return this season. It remains up in the air for him or Aiden Garnes if that's going to be the case. But KK Tarnew's really stepped up a couple of times, forced a fumble against Arizona before the bye week, and then after the bye week, gets in on that blitz, is essentially about to have a sack, and Sorbsby makes the decision to throw it up, leads to the pick 6 for West Virginia there on that 4th and 1 play. So that's one thing that was noticeably different than me that I noticed, just to the naked eye. I haven't gone back and rewatched the game, done my film review or anything that I'll release on the YouTube channel here on CRW for channel members later in the week. But, just while I was watching the game, doing the watch along here, it definitely stuck out to me, the more aggressive play calling from the defensive side and mixing in a little bit more man coverage, which I think worked at times. And I think we're going to need to do a little bit more of that, because sometimes our zone, they've been able to pick that apart and people know that it's coming. We're more of a zone team. And so that's one thing I want to see moving forward. I mentioned this in the preview, and I think we saw a little bit of it in the game, is when you switch, coordinators and they're going to do something a little bit differently, you never know exactly what that's going to be. So in the very first game they're calling, you have the element of surprise on your side a little bit. And West Virginia had that, and I'm not saying that's an excuse or not saying the success isn't going to continue, but I'm just saying, I want to keep that in mind moving forward. But if West Virginia is able to replicate any of this success and even force, 1 turnover in each of the final 3 games, then we're seeing an improvement from what we've seen previously. So that's, more aggressive style I like. And of course, forcing turnovers is going to be big for West Virginia. I think they're going to need to have both of those moving forward. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that main storyline. And the other storyline I want to briefly discuss here before we get into the stats from the game, and I'll provide my players of the game, is, of course, Nico Marchiol and Garrett Green. I think that that's something that's going to be discussed heavily probably this week. We'll get Neil Brown's thoughts on it later today. I'm recording this on Monday morning, releasing this on Monday, but we'll find out maybe some of his thoughts later today. I'm guessing, if I was Neil Brown, I would probably give both players reps, maybe split the reps 50-50 between Nico and Garrett Green this week. What do I think is going to happen? I ultimately think that I would be surprised if Neil Brown doesn't go back to Garrett Green, just knowing Neil Brown and his history a little bit. I think there's positives and negatives to both sides of the coin, and we saw a little bit of that this week. As Nico came back down to earth a little bit with his performance. I think he started off a little bit with some accuracy issues. Maybe it was jitters, but he settled into the game and then made some nice throws throughout the contest. But you also look, and it was one of West Virginia's worst rushing performances in a while. They had under 100 yards rushing, which shout out to Cincinnati's run defense. I'm sure they wanted to focus on that after they had given up, 400 plus to West Virginia on the ground last year, and they did a good job of it. Dante Corleone played well, but also Brandon Yates really held his own in a lot of situations. And I want to shout out Brandon Yates, and I'll mention him more when we talk about the stats and stuff. Spoiler alert, maybe. But as far as the game performance is concerned, with Nico, I think you add a little bit to your passing offense. He's a little bit more accurate over the middle. Those slant throws, he can maybe even hit the flare passes to the running back a little bit more. But also, if you're Neil Brown and you're looking at it, you said we had 92 yards rushing. If we have Garrett Green, some of those plays where Nico scrambled out and got hit after a gain of 2 or 3, 4, 5 yards. If we have, Garrett Green, is that, a 10, 15, 20-yard gain potentially, that puts us over 100-yard rushing. That helps us in the game, and maybe he can still hit some of the throws we need him to hit, some of the deep shots and stuff, as he's shown he can do in the past. It just depends on if Garrett Green's fully healthy and recovered and is able to do that, and maybe they'll learn about that through practice this week. But I think that's an interesting storyline heading out of this game now moving forward, especially when you got a quarterback in Nico that's really got good, momentum going right now. If you believe in that, West Virginia's won 2 straight games with him. If you make a change, do you worry about throwing off that chemistry, throwing off that balance that you currently have that's led to 2 straight wins in this conference, when you need to continue to win here in the final 3 games and try and win out as much as possible? So that's something interesting to take note of. And then the last thing I want to mention here, and then we'll get into stats, guys, is just a brief preview of the grades. I always cover these in members only live stream here on the channel for all channel members on the YouTube side of things, which appreciate you guys if you check this out on YouTube. But if you listen on the audio side, be sure to come over to the YouTube where you can get more WVU football content, including becoming a channel member, where you get bonus stuff such as a player grades video where I cover the player grades from the week, the snap counts, injury report, depth chart projections, and also, of course, do a film review and game rewatch commentaries. But having said that, I did want to discuss something to really just kind of drive home how well the West Virginia defense performed in their first game under Jeff Kuntz. And I think you can't avoid the fact that, you fire your defensive coordinator and you come out in your first game with a new guy at the helm that's, trying to maybe position himself to have that job in the future. And you have one of your best defensive performances in 2 seasons, maybe. I mean, it's got to be up there for one of the best in the past couple of seasons. And, even the PFF grades, I just wanted to provide a couple of notes there from it that really drive that home. And this was essentially your highest defensive grade of the season. It's 0.1 behind your defensive grade in Oklahoma State. Your defensive grade as a team in Oklahoma State was 73.9. Your defensive grade in this game against 73.8 was 73.8 in this game against Cincinnati. But most importantly, the biggest difference that I think we saw, and that hopefully wasn't a fluke, because Cincinnati is a good passing offense, and West Virginia's going to see a couple more good passing offenses down the line here in these final 3 games. So we knew passing coverage had to improve. And West Virginia had their highest coverage grade of the season in this game against Cincinnati. So that's a positive sign. Hopefully you can just replicate that moving forward. 74.8 coverage grade, by far the highest of the season. Actually, the only coverage grade this season that West Virginia's had that's been above 70. Your next highest was Oklahoma State at 67.5. So 74.8 coverage grade, highest coverage grade of the season for West Virginia as a team, and essentially the highest defensive grade as a team as well for West Virginia this year. Good debut for Jeff Kuntz. Got to hope you can replicate that, and we'll see what happens at quarterback moving forward. Just kind of my thoughts after this win, 31-24. West Virginia kind of has the defense carry him for the first time this season. But let's dive in a little bit on the numbers, take a look at the stats from the game, and I'll name my players of the game, and then we will talk a little bit about the Big 12. Well, let's do the interesting things of note first before we get into the stats and the players of the game, actually. Let's go ahead and do that. Interesting things of note from this game. Short list here, not too many things, but notable that we need to take note of moving forward, I think. And one of those, obviously, is one we continue to address here on these review and reaction shows, and that is the 16th consecutive game now West Virginia has started with the ball first. This week, Cincinnati wins the toss, defers, as most teams do. We know West Virginia's had an interesting strategy under Neil Brown. It's an analytics-based thing he's talked about where it gives you more possessions on the year, and they like that, so they've continued to try and get the ball first. And, mixed results with obviously a 5-4 record on this season. But, last year you had a positive record and you started doing this there as well, because 16 consecutive times you've gotten the ball first now. So there's one. And then this was WVU's 18th win in 22 games all time against Cincinnati now. So pretty good job in the series there, and especially here as Big 12 mates. West Virginia has won both of those contests. And West Virginia now 3-0 on the road in Big 12 conference play to begin this season. West Virginia's 3-0 record on the road in conference play this year is their best start ever in Big 12 conference road games since they've been in the conference. So got to shout that out there here. And then WVU has now scored 30-plus points in 13 of the last 17 games. So say what you want about the offense at times, especially in this game. You can kind of harp on it a little bit more, dive into that more here as we get into the stats momentarily. But 30-plus points in 13 of the last 17 is a good recipe, especially if you can allow your defense to play well and hold them under 30. I think that's a good sign for you. Look at the scores of the past 2 games. You beat Arizona 31-26. You beat Cincinnati 31-24. So I think for West Virginia, Try and hold your opponent under 30. Try and score 30. That's your recipe here, maybe in the home stretch. And then this was the first time a WVU defense has scored 2 touchdowns since 2013. So it had been over a decade you hadn't done that on defense, and you do it with a new defensive coordinator in his debut game. Crazy there. And that last time was at Baylor in 2013 when West Virginia's defense scored 2 touchdowns. This was only the 5th time since 2000 that WVU has had 2 defensive touchdowns in a football game. The pick six was West Virginia's first interception return for a touchdown since 2022. So, been a few years on that one as well. Didn't have a pick six last year either, despite, some good play there from Beanie Bishop at the cornerback position. He did have a couple interceptions. None were returned. So, first pick six since 2022. And then your first fumble return for a touchdown since 2015. So, close to a decade as well on that one. So that's the interesting things of note from this week I wanted to talk about. Now let's talk a little bit about the stats from this game. As West Virginia gets the 31-24 victory, they move to 5-4 overall, 4-2 in Big 12 play, in what was essentially an elimination game, if I can get that out correctly. Their elimination game within the crazy Big 12 race, which we'll talk more about the Big 12 here momentarily. But team stats from this one, and it's funny because if you look at this box score from this game, you would not think West Virginia won this. It just shows how big the turnovers were in this game, and more importantly, the points off turnovers. West Virginia ran 2 of them back for touchdowns. And good play on special teams for West Virginia in this game as well. We do need to note that Preston Fox had a big punt return and a big kick return. But team stats, only 9 first downs for West Virginia in this game versus 24 for Cincinnati. I mean, you get 20-plus first downs, you expect to win. You have less than 10 first downs, you're not expecting to win that game. West Virginia's offense struggled a bit in this one. That's why I think you really have a little bit of the QB controversy discussion. In the past, if West Virginia won this game, I would have thought for sure you stick with Nico, especially with how he played against Arizona. Not saying he necessarily had a bad game in this one. We'll talk about his performance momentarily, but the offense as a whole didn't perform well. So now I think you maybe have a bit of a controversy to what you do moving forward. Third down efficiency, West Virginia 3 of 11. Cincy ends up 7 of 16, but West Virginia started very well on third down defense. I think Cincy started off the game 1 of 7, 1 of 8, something like that at one point. But WVU did hold them 0 of 1 on fourth down. West Virginia was 0 of 1 as well on fourth down. But I think third down defense looked improved. That's one of the areas I was watching, if you guys remember from the preview, was third down D and red zone D. And West Virginia's third down D was improved, despite the fact it ends up being decent for Cincinnati as they came back late in the game. Total yards, Cincinnati absolutely dominated this game in total yardage, 436 to West Virginia's 248. WVU wins the game with less than 250 yards on offense. Been a while since we've seen that one, and also been a while since we've seen West Virginia win with under 100 rushing yards. We know in the Neil Brown era, he has a good record when he has 100-plus rushing yards. This time, they find a way to get it done with a good defensive performance and a good, Cincinnati defensive line that was holding West Virginia's run game intact. But despite that, West Virginia does pass for 156 yards. They do a good job in pass protection. Shout out to the offensive line, doing a good job there for the most part. 9 of 15, West Virginia throws 15 passes. West Virginia tried to run the football a lot there. You see the numbers. But Cincinnati really dominated the possessions in this game, especially in the second half. West Virginia's defense had to be on the field a lot. Cincinnati throws the ball 36 times, competes 25 of those. They throw for 279 yards in the game. They also win the rushing battle, 157 to the 92. As I mentioned, West Virginia running for under 100 yards. Penalties, 3 for WVU, 5 for Cincinnati. And then, of course, the big factor in the game, what really won West Virginia the game in this one, I think, is the turnovers. Because you look at all the other categories, West Virginia tries to do a good job in rushing the football, time of possession. Cincinnati wins both those, as Cincinnati has the ball for 35 minutes as opposed to 25 for West Virginia. And the turnover battle, though, Cincinnati turns it over 3 times. West Virginia only turns it over once, although the one West Virginia turnover was kind of crucial. It looked like West Virginia was going to go up 31-7, kind of bury Cincinnati, may put the nail in the coffin, but that turnover allowed Cincinnati to make a run and make this a close game at the end there. But then we got to talk individual stats here, and this is where I will name my players of the game from this one, as obviously West Virginia gets the win, so we talk a little bit about players of the game. We get to name those here after West Virginia wins. Nico Marchiol, as we mentioned, 9 of 15, 156 yards, 1 TD, 1 pick. Not the best QB rating, but, did 10 yards per completions, not too shabby. The completion percentage, not as high as it was against Arizona, but still, plus 50% there. So that's at least better than what it had been early in the season for West Virginia. And I think he did make some good throws into tight windows, especially later in the game. Most of those inaccuracies were early. And of course, the one pick, a bad mistake. He kind of underthrew the ball there, trying to throw the go ball into the end zone to Rodney Gallagher after he hit a couple deep balls. But to me, that's what I did like about him, and I have liked in the past couple of games. He's hit deep balls in both his performances against Arizona and against Cincinnati now, and I think West Virginia needs that deep passing game. So we'll see what West Virginia does moving forward, as it looks like Garrett Green may be healthy moving forward now. Rushing, Jaheim White leads the team, 13 carries, 64 yards, nearly 5 yards a carry for Jaheim, but a lot of those came West Virginia's first drive. He had, 3 big runs, and then after that, West Virginia was really kind of held in check with the rushing attack. Jaheim White, I don't know if he was banged up or what happened. Didn't really see him a lot in the second half, it felt like. And then CJ held to 4 carries, 12 yards. He may still not be 100% as well. Nico does run the football 9 times for 18 yards, but the one big one was the QB draw for a touchdown there in this game, as he does score a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. So that's the positive side of Nico's game in this one. But I think, like I said, if you have Garrett Green, do you turn those 18 rushing yards into, at least 40 or 50 and really, maybe help your rushing side of things? So who knows what West Virginia does moving forward. Nico can still help you in the run game. He's shown that, but this wasn't one of his better performances. Cincinnati, I think, was kind of keying on that a lot of the time, but he was able to break free once for a nice quarterback run where he did make somebody miss on that QB draw and get in the end zone for the touchdown. Receiving wise, I think Justin Robinson's really coming on now that he's healthy late in the season. He had the big touchdown catch against Pitt. He had some big plays since then, but hadn't got into the end zone since that time. Now finally gets in again. 2 catches, 60 yards. He catches a slant pass from Nico, who's shown the good, propensity to throw those in the goal line situations, in the red zone situations. He's thrown some nice ones in the past couple of weeks. Puts another one into a tight window to Justin Robinson, who made a nice catch, held on through a tough hit as well to maintain possession and get the touchdown for West Virginia. And then the deep ball. I mentioned Nico had 2 of those. One was to Justin Robinson. That's how he ends up to lead the West Virginia in receiving yards with the 60 yards and the only Mountaineer to catch a touchdown pass. Traylon Ray's lone catch was a 38-yard reception, so continues to be a deep target for West Virginia in the passing game. Cole Taylor targeted a lot in this one, 5 catches, 30 yards. Had some nicely designed screens to him, I thought, but they really just couldn't get loose the majority of the times. He did have 1 or 2 of them that did, and they did help West Virginia on a couple of drives. But, still like the fact that you're trying to involve him in the passing game as he leads West Virginia in receptions. And then Jaheim White, a big play. And what I like about that is, like I said, the run game wasn't getting going, but you do get him on that throwback screen that really helped West Virginia get a score. Kind of send all the motion to the left, a little bit of misdirection, send Jaheim back to the right. He gets the catch and makes a big play for West Virginia. And that's, the second consecutive week you've got the ball to Jaheim in another way. Last, game, it was against Arizona on a jet sweep. This time it's a little throwback screen and getting him involved a little bit in the passing side of things for a 28-yard reception. So there's the offensive numbers for West Virginia. And, I think, maybe you could give it to Nico. He does score 2 TDs, but I think, some of the other performance was a mixed bag, but I think he definitely got to be a candidate for the player of the game in this one. Jaheim's obviously, my favorite player, but I don't want to be biased. I feel like I'd be biased giving it to him. Good performance from Justin Robinson, but I'm going to go a different direction. I kind of said spoiler alert earlier, and that was because Brandon Yates. I mentioned him, and I think it deserves mentioning because he was matched up against Dante Corleone, and West Virginia, did score in that quarterback draw. That's, involves him having to hold Corleone, and a lot of the times there weren't really any errant snaps. As Cincinnati's running that 3-down lineman look now with Tyson Vite as their defensive coordinator, who came over from Iowa State. And, with the man right in front of him, over top of him, sometimes he had struggled with snaps. He really got that corrected in this game. And the man that was over in front of him and over top of him was one of the best defensive linemen and one of the best nose tackles, not only in the conference, but in the nation, in Dante Corleone. And he didn't really make too big of an impact until, later in the second half of this game, he made a couple of plays. But I think Brandon Yates did a good job. So shout out to West Virginia offensive line and pass protection, and shout out to Brandon Yates for his performance in this one. We've kind of had to harp on him a little bit at times this season, but I thought he had a great bounce back, and I hope he continues to play that way moving forward on the rest of the season. So Brandon Yates, shout out to you, man. Player of the game for me on offense, which we'll talk a little bit about the defensive numbers now, as West Virginia, really 3 guys that I want to mention here and highlight in a big way, and that's Vitorma Mulba, Josiah Trotter, and Anthony Wilson. Let's start with Vitorma Mulba because 13 total tackles, and I think on PFF he was credited with 8 stops as well, but 13 total tackles from the nose tackle spot, nearly unheard of. Awesome performance from Vitorma Mulba, who's really came on in recent weeks and stands out for West Virginia yet again. 13 total tackles and a half a TFL. Josiah Trotter continues to be one of the best linebackers in this conference, in my opinion. I think he's having a potential freshman All-American type season. The redshirt freshman continues to be, West Virginia's leader in tackles on the season, as he has 12 total in this game and gets a TFL and a half in this one as well. And then Anthony Wilson, you got to shout out his performance. 11 tackles, 6 of those being solo, and of course the big pick 6. He may have recovered a fumble, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Can't 100% remember in this one. But Trey Lathan, a sack and a TFL of his own. Good pressure. Looked a little bit like the Trey Lathan that we saw at the beginning of the 2023 season. He's starting to come into his own. Shout out to Garnett Hollis, man. He gets a pass deflection in this game. I thought a lot of times he was really around the ball, and even some passes Cincinnati completed, I remember saying, hey, he was, some of the better coverage I'd seen from him. I think maybe that was because West Virginia doing a little bit more man coverage, and I think he maybe is a little bit better at that than more than his own corner. Tyron Bradley continues to perform well for WVU. He obviously recovers the fumble that runs it in for a touchdown, so he scores a defensive touchdown for the Mountaineers. He's really had a great season at the spur position. I think you've got to shout out Vic Cabral. The hiring of him has paid off in this season as Tyron Bradley's performed well. You've got more production out of the spur position, used to be known as the bandit position, than you have in the No Brown era previously. You also had a TFL in the game there, so some defensive standouts, and of course Sean Martin with the sack in the game as well. And I think Dantes Fagan, back-to-back games now, he's played well, having to get the start at corner in place of Aiden Garnes, and he's really, performed well in those starts there, I think. Also, so shout out to those players on the West Virginia defense. Player of the game for me, I think I've got to go Anthony Wilson with the pick 6, 11 tackles, because he's really, they talked about him being much improved, and I think he's shown that and just quietly having a really good season. I think Mulba and Trotter are the more obvious picks, and Mulba's really had a strong coming on party here late in the portion of the season for West Virginia and continues to play well. And Trotter, you could probably name him your defensive player of the game every week, but I think Anthony Wilson being, Johnny on the spot, getting that pick, running it back for a touchdown, but also you look at that play, and prior to that, he's the same man that forced the 4th and 1. That then, allowed him to get that pick and then, really changed the game a little bit for West Virginia in this one. So shout out to Anthony Wilson. I'll give him my player of the game on defense. And shout out to West Virginia special teams, as I said, performed well in this game also. So that will kind of do us there as we put the bow on Cincinnati a little bit. And now we transition into a bit of Big 12 talk, guys. Let's do this here as it's interesting and another crazy week in the Big 12 here in week 11. We'll talk a little bit about the scores here. We'll recap those. And then I want to talk about the standings because as is shown in the thumbnail for you guys watching on the video what's a shide? Sound like Sean Connery. But West Virginia still in the mix in the Big 12 race, very much so. After I said that was maybe an elimination game, West Virginia now 4-2 in conference, and we'll talk about the standings momentarily. But first, let's talk about the scores from week 11 in the conference here. Obviously, we covered West Virginia's 31-24 victory over Cincinnati. But as we mentioned, you needed to be cheering, for Iowa State to pick up another loss or two. Man, do they pick up one to Kansas? Kansas, I think we talked about them being like maybe the best 2-win team in the country prior to this game. They've been ahead in the fourth quarter in every game except for one of their season prior to this one. And obviously they continue that ahead in the fourth quarter of this one as Jalen Daniel seems like maybe he's knocked some of the rust off. Kansas gets a win, and they're in Arrowhead Stadium, 45-36 over Iowa State, who did rally, but it's 2 consecutive losses for Iowa State, which has really opened up the door for a lot of teams in the Big 12. Maybe we manifested this one, spoken into his existence. Shout out to Brad, one of the co-hosts here on the CRW, who also picked Kansas, tried to help me manifest this victory as we knew it would be good for West Virginia, and it happens. Kansas takes down Iowa State, but we also needed Texas Tech to get a win. And we need them to continue to win because we play them and then can beat them head-to-head. But they fall to Colorado. But not all hope is lost. Talk about that momentarily here as we talk about the standings. But Colorado beats Texas Tech 41-27. And yet again, another week I've got to eat crow on Colorado. Unfortunately, didn't think they were going to be, much this season, and they're looking like one of the best teams in the conference. 7-2 overall, and they're sitting alone there at second place right now. They do have, 3 games left in the season, and who knows what could happen after we've seen some crazy upsets throughout the Big 12 here in the past couple of weeks. Arizona State, also a team that's still in the mix, as UCF can't quite get it done there in the fourth quarter. Arizona State outlasts them. And you could say BYU is the surprise of the Big 12, but you could also say Arizona State is the surprise of the Big 12. Maybe you throw Colorado in the mix there, but I think there were some people preseason that were a little bit higher on Colorado. So I think Arizona State and BYU more of a surprise, but Arizona State finds a way to get it done yet again at home in Tempe, and Kenny Dillingham has Arizona State still in the mix, as we'll talk about the standings momentarily, with 35-31 victory over UCF. Oklahoma State, unfortunately, reeling right now. You guys know I gave up on picking them this week. Mike Gundy usually finds a way to get things right, correct the ship. Hasn't been the case this season, and who knows, man. They're winless in Big 12 play. Let's hope they find a way to get a conference victory before it's all said and done. But no shot this week as TCU rolls them in Fort Worth 38-13. And then the Holy War. This game, man, did it generate some controversy afterwards? I think it's more so than anything what we've talked about a lot on the CRW podcast. If you've been following us throughout the season here, is the Utah fan base being a little bit absurd, a little bit obnoxious. And we talked about that through the offseason. That's one of the reasons leading into the season we weren't high on Utah, didn't think they'd win the conference like Utah thought they'd come in and dominate. And yet again, they did play well in this game, and you got to shout them out for that. They led BYU for a lot of this one, but BYU seems like a team of destiny. A lot of people are now comparing them to TCU when they made the playoffs, so, a couple of seasons ago. And BYU, yet again, finds a way to get it done late in this game. Avoid the upset in a rivalry game, and I mentioned in a preview for this one, I thought it would be close because despite BYU being really good this season, you never know what can happen in these rivalry contests. And they found a way to get it done in the end, 22-21 over Utah. Utah was upset over a holding call that they thought wasn't defensive holding, but I think, you've seen replays of it. You've seen it slowed down now. Certainly looked like defensive holding to me, but the real crazy thing coming out of this game was the Arizona athletic director, his crazy comments as he sat down at the podium, unannounced, unprompted, unscheduled, to really, go in at the Big 12, talk smack to them about, being in the conference and, saying they essentially they didn't want to be in this conference. They, thought they were getting, a fair conference. Don't feel like it was fair. And, you look at it, first of all, it was holding, but also to me, this just kind of echoes what we've talked about all season, and it starts at the top. Obviously, the Utah fan base isn't going to be that great when you see that's the guy leading, kind of their athletics there at Utah. The athletic director sits down and goes in. I think he got a $40,000 fine, a public reprimand after those comments, but Utah now 1-5 in conference, bro. I mean, now's not the time to be doing that and saying you think you're better than this conference and being pretentious and all that after you've came in with that attitude from the beginning, and now you're 1-5 and you want to come out and complain about a call that wasn't frankly that bad of a call in my opinion. But we're a pro BYU podcast anyways here, so we're glad to see BYU get the win 22-21. So there is the recap of the scores this week, but more importantly, we have to talk now about the Big 12 standings, because after some crazy results yet again, and West Virginia finding a way to get it done yet again for the second consecutive time, and now West Virginia, 3 games left. They're trying to win out. If they find a way to do it, they're going to be in the mix, because if we look at the standings here, BYU alone at number 1, obviously 9-0, 6-0 in conference. Colorado at number 2, alone with the 5-1 conference record currently, 7-2 currently on the season. But you see here, tied for 3rd as far as conference records are concerned, which creates big tiebreaker scenarios, because yes, West Virginia lost to Iowa State and Kansas State, but if there's at least 3 teams in the tiebreaker, which is looking like it could be the case, whether it's West Virginia, Arizona State, and Iowa State, or Kansas State, or West Virginia, Kansas State, and Iowa State alone, head-to-head isn't really factored in there. So West Virginia still has a chance to talk more about that momentarily. But Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona State, and West Virginia, all 4-2 in conference there. So all essentially tied for 3rd in the conference, despite the fact that Iowa State, Kansas State, and Arizona State are 7-2 overall. West Virginia is still in the mix because they've done a good job in Big 12 play with their 5-4 overall record. And then you look down here, Texas Tech, 6-4 overall, 4-3. TCU, 4-3, 6-4 overall. Baylor, 3-3 in conference, 5-4 overall. Cincinnati, 3-3 and 5-4 at 10. And then you get down here into the bottom portion where Houston having a better season than expected. They're 3-3 in Big 12 play at 11th. Kansas gets a conference win, moves up to 12. They're 2-4 in conference. UCF drops to 2-5 in Big 12 play. They're 13. Utah, like we said, 1-5. They're tied there with Arizona at 14-15. And of course, Oklahoma State still at the bottom, 0-7 in conference currently. So that's kind of where it sits, with a lot of interesting things happening in that middle portion, particularly there at the 3rd spot. But you look here and you want to talk about some of the tiebreaker scenarios now, right? So one of the most interesting ones that I've seen was shared here by Walk On Red Shirts, a college football account on X here, which I'm going to share on the screen for you guys watching the video version here on YouTube. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, because it talks about how wide open the door is for West Virginia if Of course, this is a big if. West Virginia has to handle their part and try and win out on the season over these last 3 games. But if they find a way to do that, then West Virginia has a chance to sneak into the Big 12 title game because of the tiebreaker scenario here. And so walk-on redshirts presents in this scenario that if Utah beats Colorado and West Virginia wins out, that the Big 12 championship would essentially be BYU and West Virginia, because they put this into the Big 12, FAQ there as far as tiebreakers is concerned. And within this scenario, though, this plays out with Iowa State beating Kansas State. Those 2 teams still have to play, obviously, at Farmageddon here at the end of the season, which is going to determine a lot in this race. But if Kansas State wins out, it would be BYU and Kansas State. Got to point out that in this scenario, Iowa State defeats Kansas State. But if Utah, it's funny, Utah, we might have to root for them a little bit to beat Colorado. West Virginia needs to root against Colorado here in the late portion of the season. And then we need Iowa State to beat Kansas State. But if Utah beats Colorado and West Virginia wins out, and then Iowa State beats Kansas State, West Virginia would be in the Big 12 championship game against BYU. So, one of the questions in the thumbnail that's asked, West Virginia still in the hunt for the Big 12 championship? Absolutely. But you have to handle your business and win out over these final 3 games. As you see there, West Virginia would be the 2 seed. If Utah beats Colorado, West Virginia wins out, and Iowa State finds a way to beat Kansas State here at the end of the season, West Virginia would get the tiebreaker in that scenario just because of all the crazy stuff that gets in the mix when you get into these multi-team tiebreakers that could take place in the Big 12, as it looks like you're going to have multiple teams potentially with 2 conference losses. But the only thing that throws a wrench into this, if Colorado wins out, they're in there. You need Colorado to lose 1 game. West Virginia's got to win out. But West Virginia is still in the mix as we update the Big 12 standings, talk a little bit about the crazy scenarios going on within the conference here on episode 207 of the CRW podcast. But that will pretty much do it, guys. We've got into, of course, the discussion of the West Virginia game, the interesting things of note, stats breakdown, and, of course, players of the game. And then one of the biggest things from this episode, obviously, the Around the Big 12 segment getting more and more crucial here as we move on in the crazy conference race as chaos continues to ensue. And that chaos is honestly good for West Virginia, and enough of it has ensued that the Mountaineers have a chance to make an appearance in a Big 12 title game if they can do their part here at the end of the season. But they've got to do that and win out these final 3 games. And it starts with Baylor coming up this week, and we'll be back, of course, to preview that later in the week. Look for our Baylor preview and predictions episode releasing most likely on Wednesday. And as that comes out, of course, then you can share your predictions in our live stream here on YouTube on Thursday night that we do those weekly throughout the season. So, if you're listening on the audio side, we appreciate you tuning in that way. Any podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, you name it. But be sure to come over to the CRW YouTube. Give us a subscription. You can get a ton of extra content, including some really bonus content if you become a channel member here. But if you do tune in on that video side, be sure to give us a like, hit the thumbs up button on the video. That helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm, helps this find more Mountaineer fans, which is always the goal here as we continue to try and grow the CRW community and get others to come along and chat about WVU football with us, which we'll continue to cover throughout the end of this season as West Virginia seeks to remain in contention for a potential Big 12 championship game appearance coming up this week against Baylor. And we can't wait to talk about that game on the CRW, and interested to hear your all's thoughts on it as well. But throw your thoughts on this game or the Big 12 standings and as things sit right now within the conference in the comments below. If you are watching on the YouTube video, if you're on the audio side, leave us a rating. We appreciate that. But I'm going to get out of here, guys. That's all I've got here for episode 207, our Cincinnati review and reaction. But hey, another fun one, another positive one to talk about as West Virginia finds a way to win, and we hope they continue to find ways to win at the close of this season, and we'll see how they go about that moving forward as we cover the Mountaineer football season. Moving on here on the CRW, the Country Roads webcast. I appreciate you tuning in to this episode. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz. And until next time, let's go, Mountaineers.
Then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those